Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an event that completely shattered the world as humanity knew it, only to violently and dramatically rebuild it. We're talking about a historical turning point so massive, it literally altered the course of human history forever. I am so glad you're here with us because understanding this single, terrifying era, well, it actually unlocks the secrets to how our modern world was formed.
So, I want you to put yourself in this terrifying scenario for a second. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that a completely invisible disease is spreading like wildfire across your city. It's hitting the surrounding villages, crossing into entire countries, and here's the kicker. There is no cure, there are no vaccines, nobody even has a fundamental understanding of what a virus or bacteria is. You're just watching as families disappear in a matter of days and bustling, lively villages become completely empty, silent ghost towns.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the death toll is just staggering. Between the years 1346 and 1353, historians estimate that somewhere between 75 million and 200 million people died. Just let that sink in. That makes it one of the absolute greatest disasters ever recorded in human history. The sheer apocalyptic stakes of those 7 years are honestly kind of hard to wrap our modern minds around. But that was the reality of the Black Death.
Section 1. An invisible global threat. A look at the global devastation.
Section 2. What was the disease? Identifying the biological culprit.
Now, to really grasp the history and the absolute chaos that unfolded, we first need to understand the science of the disease itself. The Black Death was a devastating outbreak of the plague, and it was caused by this specific, nasty little bacterium, Yersinia pestis. Once someone was infected with this bacteria, they faced brutal, agonizing symptoms. We are talking incredibly high fevers, severe chills, total physical weakness, and painfully swollen lymph nodes. You've probably heard them called buboes. And remember, without modern medicine, survival was exceptionally rare.
And this brilliantly illustrates the grim, three-step hitchhiking journey the disease took. First, infected rats would board merchant ships. Second, fleas living on those rats would carry and transmit the bacteria. And finally, those fleas would bite and infect the humans. In some forms, the plague could even spread directly from person to person, which essentially made it an incredibly efficient and deadly biological machine. This wasn't just some isolated regional tragedy either. We can trace the pandemic's deadly global path starting all the way back in Central Asia. As merchants traveled along the famous Silk Road, the disease simply packed its bags and moved right along with them. Global trade and merchant ships acted as a superhighway for this pandemic. By 1347, ships carrying sailors who were literally already dying arrived at a port in Sicily. Within just months of that arrival, the plague rapidly overwhelmed European cities, tore through Asia, devastated the Middle East, and reached deep into North Africa, packing hospitals with the sick.
Section 3. Chaos and mass panic. A society in fear.
As the disease spread, nobody had any clue how to stop it. And because of that, fear actually began to spread even faster than the plague itself. Total panic took over, triggering an absolute social collapse. People were so terrified they just abandoned their own homes. Parents were separated from their children. The basic day-to-day functions of society just completely stopped. Markets closed down, schools stopped teaching, and churches were packed with frightened people desperately praying for survival. In a lot of towns, so many people died that there weren't even enough workers left to bury the dead, which led to mass graves. Entire communities just vanished from the map.
Section 4. The fall of feudalism. How society was reshaped.
So the crucial point is how this immense tragedy actually triggered an incredible economic transformation. The contrast here is absolutely fascinating. Before the plague, Europe had a huge population. That meant cheap labor and highly powerful landowners who controlled a really strict feudal system where peasants had basically zero rights. But after millions died, well, there was a severe labor shortage. Suddenly, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers were scarce, making them incredibly valuable. Workers could suddenly demand much higher wages, and the landowners had no choice but to pay up. This massive shift in wealth empowered the working class, allowed peasants to seek out better-paying jobs in the cities, and directly led to the decline of the whole oppressive feudal system.
Section 5. Birth of the Renaissance. A cultural rebirth.
It is this amazing paradox of history that such extreme trauma and suffering ultimately paved the way for a massive cultural, scientific, and artistic rebirth. I mean, the disaster completely shattered old superstitions. It exposed just how little doctors actually understood at the time, which pushed future generations to really study disease scientifically. This led directly to organized hospitals and the invention of quarantine systems to isolate the sick, public health measures we literally still use today. It also sparked deep scrutiny of religious suffering. Some people lost their faith entirely, while others became way more devoted. And culturally, cities transformed into vibrant centers of learning, science, and art, forever changing the landscape of Europe.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this artistic movement perfectly captured the great equalizer of the plague. The pandemic deeply influenced the minds of artists and writers. This popular theme, known as the Dance of Death, perfectly captured the new mindset of the era. It didn't matter if you were a wildly wealthy landowner or a poor peasant, the plague treated everyone exactly the same. So art from this period became heavily focused on mortality, featuring skeletons and these really stark reminders of the fragility of life.
Because everyday workers were now earning higher wages, they finally had some disposable income. This newfound wealth allowed ordinary people to invest in education and in trade. As society shifted and folks became more mobile and way more educated, new ideas began spreading incredibly rapidly. This huge socioeconomic acceleration, indirectly caused by the plague, is what many historians believe directly prepared Europe for, and literally funded, the explosion of ideas, science, and art that we now call the Renaissance.
Section 6. Lessons for today. Modern takeaways.
So, why does a 14th century crisis still matter to you and me right now? Well, the parallels are pretty striking. The Black Death teaches us the absolute critical importance of public health measures and scientific research. It really highlights why international cooperation is so vital against diseases, especially when global travel and trade can spread a pathogen in months, if not days. But above all else, it demonstrates the undeniable strength of human resilience. Despite an almost unimaginable loss of life, societies didn't just recover, they rebuilt, they progressed, and ultimately, they thrived. I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on. If humanity could literally build the Renaissance, an era of unparalleled artistic, scientific, and cultural advancement from the absolute ashes of the Black Death, what world-changing transformations might emerge from the global crises of our own time? History shows us, time and time again, that our darkest moments often leave lessons that shape a much brighter future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking forward.